The wheels of her cart kicked up clouds of dust as she crested the hill, her eyes fixed on the stretch of Main Street ahead. Huh, someone muttered from the porch of the general store. Who's that? A boy with a tattered cap laughed and pointed. Looks like she's lost, Pa. Maybe she's from the wrong side of nowhere. She tightened her grip on the reins. I'm just passing through, she said, voice steady though her chest thumped. The crooked shopkeeper leaned from his doorway, arms crossed. Well, look what the wind blew in. Think you can buy something, miss? His grin was sharp, eyes flicking to her worn dress. I just need some water, she answered, voice calm, careful. Her gaze swept past him to the wooden plank sidewalks. Water? Huh. A woman called from across the street, her parasol twirling. Ain't no decent spring around here for folk like you. The sun dipped lower, painting the windows orange, and the air smelled of dust and hay. She felt the weight of all their eyes pressing down, but she kept her shoulders straight. I only mean to be on my way, she said, tipping her hat politely. A boy snickered. Watch it, she'll trip over her own boots. He lunged, trying to shove her toward a puddle, laughter spilling from him and his friends. Careful, she said, sidestepping just in time, feeling the mud splash near her ankles. Her cheeks flamed hot. The shopkeeper laughed. Looks like she can't even walk straight. I can manage, she said, voice tight, steadying the reins with one hand. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the leather. Eli, leaning against a fence at the far end of the street, watched quietly. His eyes were calm, unflinching, and he did not smile. When the boys glanced at him, their laughter faltered for a moment. He said nothing, only shifted his weight and straightened. You shouldn't let her ride through here alone, the woman with the parasol said, her tone mocking. She'll learn quick enough, the shopkeeper replied, shrugging. Dust swirled around the girl's boots as she moved toward the town's edge, each step measured. I only seek the inn, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. A horse whinnied nearby, and she glanced at the barn doors, imagining shelter and quiet beyond the street's cruel eyes. The boy in the tattered cap shouted, Hey! Watch out for the mud, stranger, and bolted past her, knocking a bucket that clanged against the boards. Her hands clenched the reins. It's fine, she whispered, her voice trembling only slightly. She felt every stare, every whispered insult, and still pressed forward. Eli's gaze followed her until she reached the edge of the town, his figure calm against the fading light. The wind rustled the dust around her, but for a brief moment, she felt it was a companion rather than a tormentor. She exhaled, cheeks still burning, and mounted her horse a little straighter. Almost there, she murmured, though the words felt hollow. A final shout came from the street, a mixture of laughter and mockery. Don't get lost, stranger. Dusty Hollow ain't kind. She did not answer. She only rode on, the town shrinking behind her, her heart still pounding but a small thread of defiance stirring as the horizon glowed orange and gold. At the hill's crest she paused. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke and dust, and for the first time that day, she felt seen, not by the town, but by the quiet man leaning on the fence, watching. Her hand rested on the saddle horn and she whispered, Maybe someone can be trusted here. And then she moved forward, alone but no longer entirely without hope. The fair was loud with voices and creaking wagons. She stepped cautiously onto the dirt lane, her dress brushing the dust. Well, look at her, a child called, pointing with small, cruel fingers. Watch your step, miss, a man said, smirking, leaning on a stall post. Don't want to trip on that hem of yours. She straightened her back. I'm careful, she replied softly, voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. A group of women huddled nearby, parasols bobbing as they whispered and giggled. She waddles like a newborn colt, one said, nudging her neighbor. Quiet now, another laughed. You'll scare the pigs if she passes by. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She kept walking, each step measured, trying not to meet their eyes. Her hands clutched the basket she had brought, knuckles white. Hey, miss. Don't spill your basket, A boy shouted, mimicking her gait. He stumbled forward, grinning, arms flailing. I'm careful, she said again, more firmly this time, lowering her eyes. The whispering followed her. She'll topple over any second now, one woman said, tilting her parasol. A man reached out from behind a stall, pretending to trip her. She recoiled, almost losing her balance, and muttered, "Please stop." From the corner of her eye, she saw him, Eli, leaning against a fence, calm and quiet. His jaw was set, and he watched with steady eyes. When the man moved closer, Eli stepped forward just enough to block him, his presence quiet but undeniable. "Mind your manners," Eli said, voice low and firm. "She passes through freely." The man froze, then muttered, "Didn't mean," and stepped back. She exhaled, tiny relief washing over her as she moved past the stall. The children had stopped laughing, eyes wide as if noticing him for the first time. "She's not one of us," a woman hissed. "Don't let her near the pies. She'll ruin the table." "She'll learn her place," another said, smirking. She stopped behind a wooden stall, her back pressing against the rough planks. Her fingers trembled as she set down her basket. The laughter swirled around her, but Eli's calm figure remained, leaning slightly on the fence, quiet and unjudging. I should leave," she whispered to herself, voice nearly swallowed by the fair's noise. The boys began mimicking her again, hopping and wobbling. "Watch out. She walks funny." She pressed her hands to her face, feeling the heat in her cheeks. She wanted to disappear, to vanish beneath the dust and laughter. Eli's gaze met hers briefly, his eyes steady. He did not speak again, but she understood. She was not entirely alone. The smell of fried bread and hay filled the air. Lanterns hung from stall posts, swinging slightly in the breeze. She pressed herself closer to the wooden planks, trembling, but the quiet of Eli's presence offered the smallest, fragile comfort. "Almost done, almost gone," she whispered, trying to steady her breath. A distant whistle and the rattle of a wagon wheel made her jump. Her heart thumped, yet a small thread of hope began to grow, hidden among the fear and humiliation. She watched Eli's calm stance, the sun glinting off his hat brim, and realized that perhaps someone in Dusty Hollow could see her worth. With a careful step, she edged further behind the stall, away from the jeers, and for the first time, she dared to breathe. The town's laughter continued, sharp and cruel, but somewhere beneath it, a quiet, unspoken promise lingered. She trudged along the dusty trail, the sun low and burning orange across the hills. I don't belong anywhere," she muttered, voice nearly swallowed by the wind. "Hungry, miss?" a calm voice asked from the fence line ahead. She looked up to see a man leaning against a post, hat tilted low, eyes steady. "Who are you?" she asked cautiously, hand brushing at the hem of her skirt. "Name's Eli," he said. "You look like you could use some supper and a place out of the dust." I can't trouble you," she said, hesitation thick in her throat. "I'm not wanted anywhere." Eli tilted his head. "A roof doesn't ask questions, neither does a fire. You're welcome." She hesitated, the muscles in her legs tight. I shouldn't. Folks'll think." "Folks," he said, "don't matter out here. Not if you're tired and hungry." He straightened and gestured to the path leading to a modest wooden cabin, lanterns flickering on the porch. Smoke rose lazily from the barn chimney. She swallowed hard, stomach twisting. I suppose, just for a bit. For as long as you need," he said simply and stepped back, tipping his hat. Her boots scuffed the gravel as she followed, each step heavier than the last. "Thank you," she whispered, almost embarrassed by the sound. "No need to thank," he said. "Just keep your balance on that slope." The porch creaked under her weight. Lantern light cast long shadows across the boards, highlighting the rough wood grain. She glanced at the barn, noting the quiet smoke and the soft smell of hay. "It smells safe," she said quietly. Eli nodded toward a stack of blankets near the cabin wall. "Pick one. Make yourself comfortable. I'll get some water." I I'm not used to this, she said, hesitating near the doorway. People usually. They usually what? He asked, leaning casually but eyes steady. Mock me, she admitted, voice trembling. Or worse. Not here, he said simply, his gaze unwavering. We don't do that out here. She let out a small breath, relief mingled with lingering tension. I'll try to believe that, she said, moving toward the blankets. Eli disappeared into the cabin, returning a moment later with a small bucket of water. Here, he said. Drink before the chill sets in. Thank you, she murmured, hands trembling slightly as she lifted the bucket. She sipped, feeling warmth trickle down her throat. You'll want supper soon, Eli said, crouching to adjust a loose plank on the porch rail. Can't work on an empty stomach. She watched him carefully, the motion steady, deliberate. You don't mock me? She asked, voice barely audible. Not once, he replied, hammering a nail quietly. Not for anything you've done, or how you look. Folks can judge all they want. I don't. Her chest lifted slightly, a fragile thread of comfort weaving into the tension that had clung to her all day. It's surprising, she admitted softly. You'll get used to it, he said, standing and brushing his hands. The fence holds stronger when it's treated with care. She let her eyes follow his movements, noticing the calm rhythm, the patience in each swing of the hammer. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a small sense of ease. Maybe this isn't as bad as it feels, she said quietly, voice almost lost in the wind brushing the porch boards. Eli didn't reply, only glanced at her, eyes steady. The barn smoke drifted lazily toward the hills, lanterns flickered, and the twilight sky deepened to soft indigo. She shifted, sitting on the porch step, fingers tracing the worn wood. You really aren't like them, she said, voice soft, almost a whisper. I try not to be, he said, returning to the fence. Helps a body sleep at night. She watched him mend the rails, silent but careful, and felt a strange warmth settle in her chest. No laughter, no mocking, she murmured to herself. Just quiet. Just help. The night wind stirred dust along the path, lanterns flickering against the cabin walls. She pressed her hands together, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and hay, feeling a fragile sense of safety for the first time in a long while. Somewhere deep down, a thought surprised her. Maybe someone here will see me as I am. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to believe it could be true. She rose before the sun, the cold morning air biting at her hands as she carried a pail of water to the barn. Careful there, Eli said quietly from the porch, hat low over his eyes. I can manage, she replied, stepping over a board that creaked underfoot. Eli set another bucket nearby. Fresh water. Didn't want you using the old well. Thank you, she said softly, looking up at him. His calm gaze held no judgment, only steady attention. Don't mention it, he muttered, adjusting the latch on the barn door. Animals come first, same as people. She paused, studying him. You make it seem simple. It's simple if you take care, he said, shoulders shifting as he lifted a hay bale onto the rack. Hard part is remembering to do it every day. She tried lifting a bucket, struggling under its weight. It's heavier than I thought, she admitted. Eli stepped closer, gripping the pail with her. Here. Lift together. Makes it easier. The water sloshed slightly, but her hands met his, steady and firm. I appreciate it, she murmured. You're welcome, he said, releasing the pail once it rested safely. Nothing wrong with a little help. Evening fell, the sky a muted orange. She shivered on the porch, brushing dust from her sleeves. Eli approached silently, carrying a worn blanket. Cold night, he said, draping it over her shoulders. Thank you, she whispered, warmth spreading through her chest. It feels safe. Good, he said quietly, stepping back. That's all that matters. The wind stirred the dust along the path. People in town, she started, hesitation in her voice. They still talk. They talk, Eli said, calm. But talk's cheap. Actions count more. A wagon rattled down the lane. A familiar mocking voice called, Well, if it isn't the stranger girl, cozying up with the cowboy now. She froze. Cousin Clara, she muttered under her breath, jaw tightening. Clara, Eli said, eyes narrowing slightly. You've come to stir trouble again? Clara smirked. I see you found a friend. Can't imagine why anyone would put up with you otherwise. I don't need your approval, the girl said, voice trembling but firm. Eli stepped forward, chest straight, gaze steady. And you'll find none here. She's welcome as she stands. Say what you will, but I won't have cruelty in my yard. Clara faltered, looking from him to the girl. You take her side? She asked, disbelief clear. I take truth and decency, Eli said simply. Not gossip or mockery. The girl swallowed, heart still racing, yet relief softened the tension. She watched Eli's quiet authority hold the space, and for the first time, she felt a shield against the town's whispers. Clara huffed, tossing her hair. This isn't over, she said, but her voice lacked its usual bite. You're right, Eli said, voice even. It isn't, but out here, respect matters more than rumor. The girl exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. The porch lanterns flickered, casting long shadows over the barn and fence, the warm light washing over the worn boards. Maybe some people are different, she whispered to herself. Eli returned to the barn quietly, leaving her with the blanket, the soft glow of the lantern, and a sense she hadn't felt in years, protection without expectation, kindness without judgment. She pressed the blanket closer, eyes tracing the quiet strength in his movements, realizing safety could exist alongside her shame. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine staying. She moved carefully through the barn, lifting hay bales and brushing dust from the stall boards. Easy now, Eli said from the doorway, his voice calm. Don't strain yourself. I can manage, she replied, shoulders tight with effort. She guided a young calf toward the trough, murmuring softly, easy now. Good, Eli said, stepping closer. Keep your hands low and steady. They respond better that way. The calf nuzzled her palm, and a small smile flickered across her face. It had stayed, she whispered, astonished. Sometimes it takes patience, he said quietly. Other times, a steady hand. She straightened, brushing sweat from her forehead. I never thought I could do this. None of us know until we try, he replied, adjusting a post along the fence. It's not weakness to learn. The morning sun filtered through the slats, dust motes drifting lazily. She carried a bucket of feed, the calf following close. I feel stronger, she said softly, almost to herself. You are, Eli said. Strength grows quietly, like the fence posts you repair. She knelt beside a broken rail, hammer in hand. I hope it holds, she murmured, tapping the wood firmly into place. It will, he said, watching her with steady eyes. Care in the work matters more than force. A breeze ruffled her hair as she stood. It's easier to face people when I feel capable, she admitted. Even the whispers don't sting as much. They'll talk, Eli said, shrugging. But the work you do speaks louder than words. By afternoon, she led the calf to water, moving with confidence. See, steady now, she said, voice gentle, guiding the animal. Eli's eyes followed her, approving but never hovering. Good. You're learning to stand in more ways than one. She glanced at him, hesitating. Do you think I belong here? I think you earn each step you take, he said. And you've earned a few already. The barn door creaked as a neighbor appeared at the fence. Well, he said, leaning on the rail. Think you belong here, do you? Her jaw tightened, a flicker of defiance sparking inside. I'm doing my part, she said, voice steady. Eli moved slightly behind her, silent but firm, a shield in posture alone. Effort counts, he said quietly, gaze unwavering. The neighbor scoffed, brushing his hands on his trousers. We'll see about that, he muttered, retreating down the path. She exhaled, chest rising and falling, feeling both tension and pride. The calf nuzzled her hand again, a quiet reward for her work. Her eyes fell on the barn wall, where a threadbare shawl had been draped, left by Eli. The fabric smelled faintly of smoke and wood, soft and comforting. She ran her fingers over it, warmth settling across her shoulders. Even small gestures mean something, she whispered to herself, fingers lingering on the threadbare edge. The sun began to dip behind the hills, lanterns swinging gently from the porch posts. Dust danced in the amber light, settling on the worn wood, the tools, and the ground where she had worked. "I think I can keep standing," she murmured, voice steady. Eli nodded silently, returning to the fence, hammer in hand, his calm presence a quiet reassurance. She straightened, taking in the barn, the calf, the fence, and the fading sky. Every small victory counted, even if only she noticed. A breeze carried a distant whisper from the town, a reminder that judgment lingered, but she pressed her hands together and faced the work before her. And for the first time in long months, she felt the slow, steady pulse of confidence rising inside her, ready to meet whatever came next. Lanterns swung gently in the barn, casting long shadows across the worn wood. She held a small book in her hands, voice trembling as she read aloud. "Once upon a time, there was a little town," she said, eyes flicking toward the children sitting cross-legged on the hay. Again, a small boy called, eyes bright. She swallowed, taking a deep breath. "All right, listen closely this time," she said, voice steadier. Eli leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his expression calm but watchful. "You've got their attention," he said quietly. "They like the story," she murmured, glancing at him with a small, hesitant smile. "Good," he said, nodding. "Keep at it. They need someone steady." Her voice grew firmer, words flowing easier. The townsfolk didn't believe in magic, but the children, they did. And so the little girl kept hoping, even when no one watched. A girl clapped softly, eyes wide. "I like her," she said. "Me too," another boy whispered, leaning forward eagerly. A sudden shout echoed from the barn doors. "What's all this? Playing teacher now?" She froze. The voice was rough, mocking. A local bully stepped inside, boots scuffing the floor. "You think you belong here?" he sneered, looking at the children, and then her. Eli straightened immediately, stepping between them. "She belongs as much as anyone else," he said, calm but firm. "You'll not frighten her, or them, in this barn." The bully scoffed. "And who says so?" "I do," Eli replied, voice even. "Respect here matters more than your threats. Leave or answer to it." The boy hesitated, eyes darting from Eli to her. She gripped the book tighter, heart pounding, yet felt warmth from his presence. "Fine," the bully muttered, backing toward the door. "You're lucky," he's soft-spoken. Eli watched until he left, then turned to her. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. I am," she said, exhaling slowly. Her hands relaxed around the book, and she looked at the children. "Shall we continue?" "Yes," they chorused, voices bright. She resumed reading, her tone calm, gentle, carrying them through the story. Eli remained silent at the doorway, eyes soft but alert, ensuring the space stayed safe. The sun dipped low outside, streaking the sky with orange and pink. Dust floated lazily in the warm lantern light, settling on hay bales and the floorboards. She glanced up through the barn's open doors, letting the colors wash over her face. "Look at that," she murmured, voice soft. "It's beautiful." "It is," Eli said, stepping beside her. "Sometimes, it's easier to see beauty when you've fought through dust and shadows." She nodded slowly, feeling the truth in his words. The children giggled and whispered, eyes wide with wonder, and she realized she could laugh too, quietly, without fear. "I never thought I'd feel this," she said, brushing hair from her face, voice barely audible. "You're not alone," Eli said. "Not here. Not now." She watched the sunset stretch across the hills, painting the sky in colors she hadn't noticed before. Her chest lifted slightly, a fragile hope rising inside. The lanterns flickered, the children settled, and she understood, for the first time in months, that she had a place, however small, where she was seen, and where kindness could exist alongside fear. And for the first time, she let herself imagine a life with someone watching her back, steady and unwavering. The sun glinted off the dusty main street as she walked toward the general store, basket in hand. "Well, if it isn't the stranger girl," a woman whispered, parasol bobbing with her laughter. "She thinks she belongs here, helping that cowboy," another said, voice sharp. "Imagine the nerve." She froze, fingers tightening around the basket. I only came for supplies," she murmured, head low. The first woman smirked. "Supplies? More like hobnobbing with Eli. Can't imagine why he'd bother with someone like you." Her chest tightened. Doubt prickled, a sting she hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe I should just go back," she whispered to herself, heart fluttering. Eli leaned on the stable door behind her, hat tilted low, eyes steady. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "Their words carry no weight here." "But they're loud," she said, voice trembling. "And I can't stop thinking they might be right." "They aren't," he said simply. "Watch the bucket," he added, nodding toward the cracked one at her feet.
"Fix what you can.
Leave the rest behind." She looked down at the worn dress brushing her ankles, threads fraying, then back at his calm gaze. A warmth settled through her, fragile but real. "I'll try," she said, voice firmer. The women in the store tittered, whispering as she entered. "Haven't we seen enough of you?" one said, leaning on the counter. "New shoes?" another asked, pointing at her boots. Or, "Did Eli give those too?" "I'm just here for supplies," she said, lifting her chin, voice steadier than she felt. A man behind the counter snickered. "Don't let her scare you," he said to the women. "She's harmless." "She's not," the first woman said sharply. "She thinks she belongs with him now." Eli's calm voice cut through her hesitation. "She belongs here if she chooses to. Not your opinion. Not your approval." The women froze, then one muttered, "Who does he think he is?" "You don't understand," she said, stepping forward, voice low but clear. "I'm not here for their opinions. I'm here because I work, and because I stand for what's right." The store quieted, dust motes drifting in the late afternoon light. Eli nodded slightly over the stable door, eyes soft but firm, giving her silent reassurance. She glanced at the cracked bucket she carried, the worn hem of her dress brushing the floor, symbols of the struggles she had faced and the persistence she had begun to find. She lifted her chin a little higher, placing the basket on the counter. "Supplies," she said simply, tone steady. "Nothing more." The townspeople exchanged uneasy glances. The whispers died down, replaced by the soft rattle of coins and the creak of floorboards. One woman muttered under her breath, "We'll see how long she lasts." She ignored the words, focusing on Eli's watchful gaze. It was calm, steady, unwavering, a reminder that kindness could endure and that she had found moral courage she hadn't known she possessed. The store smelled of wood and dried herbs. Lanterns swung slightly in the breeze from the open door, casting shadows along the worn planks. She held the basket tightly, every movement deliberate, her heart still racing but grounded by the quiet support behind her. "Thank you," she murmured to Eli, though he made no move to respond beyond a slight nod. A distant clatter of a dropped jar punctuated the silence, but she didn't flinch. She was no longer the trembling girl from weeks ago. She placed her coins carefully, lifted the basket, and turned toward the door. "I can face them," she whispered to herself. The women muttered behind her, but she walked past with steady steps. Dust swirled around her boots, lanterns flickered, and the cracked bucket of water she had carried that morning seemed heavier only in memory. Eli's quiet presence stayed at her back, his gaze reassuring, and she realized she was no longer entirely alone, no longer entirely afraid. For the first time in Dusty Hollow, she understood that standing up for herself carried a strength the town could not touch. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky orange and gold, she allowed herself to feel the small, fierce pride of one who had survived both whispers and shame and had begun to rise. The auction grounds were alive with dust and murmurs, the sun high and harsh, painting the wooden pens in golden light. She stepped carefully between the stalls, basket in hand, boots scuffing the dry earth. "Well, look who decided to show up," a rival called, leaning on a post with a smirk. "Thought you might hide in that little cabin of yours forever." "I'm here to bid," she said softly, lifting her chin. Her voice trembled for a moment, then steadied. "Not to entertain gossip." The crowd tittered, whispers carrying over the pens. Did she learn to talk properly or still stumble over words? A woman sneered. Eli stood behind her, hat low, shoulders squared. "She's not here for your amusement," he said calmly, voice carrying across the dust. "Step back or leave." "Or what?" The rival shot back, eyes narrowed. "Or you'll answer for the trouble you cause," Eli said evenly. His gaze was steady, commanding without threat, a wall against cruelty. She felt her pulse quicken but lifted her chin higher. "I've endured enough to know what's fair," she said, voice stronger now, echoing across the pens. "I do not seek approval from those who delight in shame. I bid for the livestock because it is my right, and I will not be mocked for it." A hush rippled through the crowd. Dust swirled lazily around her boots, the sun catching motes in the air like floating gold. She gripped the basket tightly, knuckles white, hands steady despite the tension in her chest. The rival sneered, but faltered under her unwavering gaze. "You think you can stand there and talk to us like that?" "I stand," she said simply, voice clear, "because it is the only way to remain honest to myself." Eli's hand brushed the barn rail behind her, a silent gesture of support. She felt its weight, not physical, but moral, grounding her against the whispers. "Quiet now," Eli added softly, eyes scanning the crowd. "We're here for the auction, not to shame anyone." A calf bawled nearby, and she knelt for a moment to study it, brushing dust from its coat. "See," she said, voice quieter now, "even the smallest life deserves care, even when others laugh." The rival muttered something under her breath, but the crowd's attention had shifted. They watched the girl and the cowboy, tension in the air, dust rising with each movement, sunlight gleaming on the worn wood of the pens. She straightened, stepping back, eyes unwavering. "I do not need validation from you," she said firmly. "I only ask that my work and effort be recognized as enough." Eli nodded subtly, fingers brushing the brim of his hat, his calm presence a steady anchor. "Enough said," he murmured, voice low, but carrying over the crowd. The rival glared, lips pressed tight, and for the first time, the girl felt no fear in her chest, only clarity. The whisper slowed, replaced by a quiet stir of curiosity and tentative respect. A boy from the audience peeked from behind a post, whispering, "She's brave." "Yes," she said, glancing toward him, eyes softening for a brief moment. "Courage is not loud. It's steady, like tending the fences or the animals you care for." The auctioneer cleared his throat, calling attention back to the pens. She lifted her basket, bidding quietly but confidently, feeling the weight of her dignity return with each step she took. The rival muttered a final, resentful huff and retreated toward the shadows of the stalls. The town women exchanged uncertain looks, murmuring to one another, unsure how to respond. She straightened fully, dust settling around her boots, fingers brushing against the worn hem of her dress. Every small movement echoed confidence, a quiet defiance against months of scorn. Eli remained nearby, silently tending a post, eyes steady, allowing her to claim the moment for herself. No words were necessary. The gesture alone spoke volumes. The sun dipped slightly behind the hills, casting long shadows across the pens, lanterns swinging in the distance. A hush lingered over the crowd, an unspoken recognition that cruelty no longer held sway. Her hands rested on the basket, pulse steady. She inhaled the warm, dusty air, heart lifting with a fragile, growing hope. The auction continued, but she no longer felt invisible. She felt present, worthy, and dignified, a moral triumph born not of spectacle, but of quiet courage. For the first time, she understood that standing firm, even against whispers and ridicule, could reshape the way the world saw her and how she saw herself. And as the wind stirred dust across the pens, she allowed herself to savor the moment, knowing that the turning point of dignity had arrived and the path ahead could now hold hope. The town square bustled with dust and murmurs, lanterns swaying gently along the boardwalks. She stood near the center, basket in hand, eyes scanning the crowd. "This stops today," she said quietly, voice carrying despite the hum of whispers. A merchant stepped forward, smirk curling his lips. "And who's going to stop us, girl?" "You?" "I am," she said, stepping closer, dust swirling around her boots. "I've seen your tricks. I know the plot to cheat Eli at the auction, and I will not let it pass." The crowd murmured, shocked, voices rising in disbelief. She knows," one woman whispered, parasol trembling in her hands. "Yes," she said firmly, lifting her chin. "And you will answer for it. No more deceit, no more mockery." Eli appeared beside her, calm as always, fingers resting lightly on the saddle horn of his horse. "She speaks truth," he said softly. "The evidence is clear. Stand honest or be called out." A man stepped forward, nervously shifting his weight. We didn't mean." "Intent doesn't erase action," she said, voice steady. "You plan to cheat. You failed to see that honesty matters more than greed." The horse stamped its hooves, impatient, echoing the tension in the air. Lanterns cast long shadows over the crowd, highlighting anxious faces and dust swirling like judgment itself. "Do you have proof?" the merchant asked, eyes narrowing. "Yes," she replied, producing a folded note from her dress pocket, hands steady. "This shows the plan, your instructions, and the amounts meant to be withheld. Nothing fabricated. Nothing hidden." Gasps ran through the crowd. Fingers pointed, whispers turned into stifled exclamations. "Impossible," one woman muttered, clutching her parasol. Eli's gaze swept the assembly. "No more lies here," he said firmly. "Truth has been shown, and justice is due." She felt a flicker of pride, a warmth spreading through her chest. "I've endured your whispers, your mockery, your attempts to shame me," she said, voice growing stronger. "But I stand here because I do what's right, not for your approval." The merchant paled, looking from her to Eli. "And what do you expect?" "Accountability," she said. "Acknowledgement of the wrong and restitution for the harm caused." One by one, the townspeople's murmurs faded into silence. Even the children watching from the boardwalks sensed the shift, eyes wide, absorbing the weight of honesty triumphing over cruelty. I suppose," the man stammered, dropping his gaze. "We will rectify it." She exhaled, a long, quiet release, and allowed herself a small, private smile. Relief and pride mingled, a balm over months of humiliation and doubt. Eli's hand brushed her shoulder, just lightly, a silent acknowledgement. "You've done what needed to be done," he said softly. She nodded, feeling the strength of his quiet support bolster her courage. Dust swirled around their boots as she stepped toward the boardwalk, the crowd parting, some still shocked, others uneasy, all witnessing a shift they could not deny. Lanterns flickered along the street, their light casting elongated shadows, painting the wooden planks in gold and amber. She inhaled, letting the cool evening air fill her lungs, chest rising and falling steadily. "I am done hiding," she whispered to herself. "I am done fearing whispers." A horse whinnied nearby, ears pricked, hooves stamping. She turned to see Eli's mount pawing the ground, steady and calm, mirroring the resolve she felt settling in her bones. The townspeople remained silent, unsure how to respond, eyes flicking between her and Eli. Even the once boastful rival looked away, ashamed or perhaps thoughtful. She said, voice softening but firm, "I can walk through this town knowing who I am, without apology." Eli's quiet nod reinforced it, and for the first time, she felt the full measure of moral vindication. Fear had no claim, cruelty no power, and her dignity was restored. The sun dipped behind the distant hills, washing the main street in warm orange and gold. Dust drifted lazily through the air, settling on boots, boardwalks, and baskets, highlighting the calm after tension. She lifted her chin, shoulders squared, and walked down the street, each step deliberate, steady, and free. Her head high, eyes bright, heart light, she felt the warmth of justice settle in her chest. For the first time in Dusty Hollow, she moved not as an outcast, not as a trembling girl, but as someone whose courage, honesty, and steadfastness had shifted the town itself. And the quiet presence of Eli at her side reminded her that she was no longer alone, never alone, and that moral victory could be as gentle as it was absolute. She carried the basket into the small kitchen, wooden floorboards creaking beneath her boots. "Careful with the plates," she said, setting them gently on the table. A boy grinned, reaching for a spoon. "I'll help. I promise I won't drop anything." "Thank you," she said softly, brushing flour from her hands. "Just be gentle." Laughter bubbled from the children as they settled, plates clattering in playful chaos. "More bread," a girl called, eyes bright. "Coming," she said, slicing slowly, mindful of each movement. "Eat carefully now." Eli leaned against the porch doorway, hat tipped back, eyes watching her. "You've done well today," he said quietly, voice calm. I feel safe," she admitted, brushing hair from her face. "It's the first time in months I've felt that." "Good," he said simply. "You deserve it." A child knocked over a cup, water spilling onto the floor. "Oh no," the boy exclaimed. "Steady," she said, smiling. "Accidents happen. Just clean it carefully." The children giggled, some helping, some watching with fascination. Eli's gaze shifted from them to her, quiet but full of warmth. "You've changed this place," he said softly. "Not just the ranch, but you and the people here see it." "I never thought it would feel like this," she murmured, hands resting on the table, eyes lingering on the repaired fence visible through the open doorway. Sunlight glinted along the smooth wood. "Small steps," Eli said. "You've taken them all." She wrapped the worn shawl around her shoulders, feeling its warmth settle across her chest. "It's strange," she said, "how something so small can mean so much." The children cheered, running outside to chase a stray calf, boots thudding softly in the dust. "Wait for me," one shouted, laughter trailing across the yard. She watched them, chest lifting, and allowed herself a soft smile. "They're happy," she said quietly, voice full of gentle wonder. "Like you," Eli said, stepping closer, hands tucked into his pockets. "You're learning to be happy too." "I think I am," she admitted, eyes meeting his. Their silence spoke volumes, steady and calm, a quiet understanding forming between them. The lantern on the porch flickered gently, casting warm light across the wooden boards. Dust drifted lazily in the air, catching in the glow like tiny sparks of hope. She looked at the barn, the mended fence, and the simple table before her. Each symbol, each repaired object, told a story of endurance, courage, and quiet triumph. "Do you think the town will notice the change?" she asked softly, voice almost a whisper. "They might," Eli said, "but what matters is you know your worth now. That's enough." A hush fell as the children's laughter faded into quiet conversation. She set the last plate down, hands brushing together, and took a slow breath, letting the warmth of the evening settle around her. "I've never felt at home," she said softly. "But I do now. Right here." Eli nodded, eyes soft, resting on hers. "And you've earned it," he said. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon orange and gold. The lantern glowed steadily on the porch, casting shadows that danced lightly across the boards. She wrapped her shawl tighter, heart full, chest steady. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the complete arc of her journey, fear transformed to courage, shame replaced by dignity, loneliness softened by community, and cruelty eclipsed by kindness. She leaned back, eyes following the children playing in the dust, and realized she had arrived, not just at the ranch, but at a place of hope, safety, and moral restoration. And in the quiet that settled over the ranch, she finally let herself rest, knowing the warmth of justice and care would carry her forward, steady and true.